What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Get Over Yourself podcast, a podcast dedicated to self development, self improvement, and helping you achieve the goals that you've laid forth in your life. I'm your podcast host, Brandon Davis, and in today's episode, I'm actually going to be interviewing someone I met a few weeks ago as they were lecturing inside of one of my entrepreneurship classes. His name is Scott Evanson. Now, Scott, he started multiple companies and sold them for large figures. He is a great guy. He left solid advice not only for business but life perspective, kind of becoming who you want to be, setting out your goals and challenges and whatnot. And so I asked him after I talked to him. He came and gave this lecture at my class, and I went up and talked to him. I thanked him afterwards, told him a little bit about the podcast, and I asked him if he'd be willing to jump on an episode with me. And to his graciousness and to my thankfulness, he said yes. So he sent me over a little bio, and so I want to read that for you guys so you can get a little bit of an idea on who Scott is. Here it is. Scott is a serial entrepreneur and startup founder who loves the early stage. He's had multiple exits as a founder and investor, and currently runs the Sandbox Startup Incubator at BYU. And Sandbox is basically a program where you get college credit for starting your own business. He's also involved with other startups as a mentor, advisor, and investor. He and his wife, Heather, have 4 crazy kids and live in Lehi, Utah. He's into mountain biking, skiing, sports, cooking, and pretty much anything adventurous, as well as spending time with his loved ones. So in today's episode, me and Scott just finished recording. We're jumping all into the nitty-gritty of how you can lay out different principles inside of your life to become a better person, a better version of yourself, and also what it means to actually go and love people and to serve them and treat them like your brothers and sisters. So we're not only stepping into a success in business and the financial realm, but how those aspects that he's kind of created and sustained inside of his life have applied into different areas inside of his life. So that's what we have in today's episode. And with that all being said, let's jump into today's episode. So Scott, some of the first questions I have for you, and just I guess so the audience can kind of get to know you a little bit better, is you've worked with a lot of different businesses inside your life. You've incorporated lots of different aspects into different realms of business. You've started and created your own businesses. You've sold some. You have invested in some, and now you're working with the startup program here at BYU, the Sandbox program. What made you even
Yeah.
get into that in your life?
I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs have stories as little kids where they, did a lemonade stand or, sold baseball cards. That's probably dates me a little bit. Probably weren't a thing. It's probably more Pokemon cards when you were a little kid, but um I did have some of that, and I'll spare you the details because you could probably fill in the blanks, but I have always kind of had an interest in making my own money. Part of it probably comes back to how my parents dealt with finances. Like my parents never
Okay.
gave us money, like ever.
No
It
allowances or
was
anything like that?
no, no. I think I was talking with my wife about this once, and I think one time in my life I can ever remember my parents just giving me money was when I finished. I served a mission for our church, and I got home after being in South America for 2 years, and my dad gave me $200, and he was like, "This ought to last you until you're independent again." And I remember looking at him like, "Oh my gosh, how the heck am I going to do that?" I'm like, "All right, got to get a job." And I think, I think that has benefited me because I've always known that you eat what you kill, and so I think my parents obviously like took care of us and my needs were met, but in terms of like disposable income to spend on things I wanted to, it was like you got to figure that out. I'm grateful for that. It actually probably has blessed me a lot in my life. So
And I've heard from a lot of people that, especially people, entrepreneurial minded type people have started businesses and gone forward and sold them, and successful people in the mind of financial literacy and financial success and whatnot. And a lot of them go back and credit a lot of their successes by just saying, "Yeah, my parents they like taught me the right principles. They helped me when I was growing up. They loved me. They cherished me." But then they also said, "You go and figure out your finances. Like that's on you." I feel like that's a big trend we see with people who often start their own types of businesses and go forward. And I think that's the same case for everything that you've been going on inside your life. And how do you think that impacted you specifically once you got to college? I mean, that's for the audience who doesn't know. When you go out and serve as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you're setting aside 2 years of your life. You're not studying, you're not working. All you're doing is going and serving people, doing missionary work, and wherever you're sent, whether that's in the U.S. or in your case, it was in Peru. Um, but you set aside all that time, and then you come back. Like you said, you didn't have a job. You're thinking, okay, I should probably go and get started on this whole college experience, right? So how did that principle that your parents taught you actually go into apply into your college life?
Yeah, I feel like when I got home, I knew, okay, I'm on my own. I've got to figure out my finances. And I even toward the end of that missionary service, I started, feeling pressure to get home and get a job and earn money because I knew that once I got home, I was kind of on my own. Being a
Hmm.
missionary, you kind of suspend a lot of that stress and that pressure because, I'd made arrangements beforehand and my parents actually helped cover most of the expense for me serving a mission. And so most of my needs were met. I worried about a lot of things, but that wasn't one of them. And I remember getting home and feeling like, okay, what kind of job am I qualified for? I was 21 years old. I hadn't really, done a whole lot. Um, and it was really interesting to watch some of my peers whose parents kind of handled that differently, who, lived in really, really great student housing and, these like beautiful apartments and townhomes. And I was in like the cheapest place I could possibly find. I remember my
That's
rent in the
that's how you
summers
got to do it.
was, yeah, my rent was $100 a month in the summers and like $220 a month during the year. This is in
Wow.
2006, right? Like I'm dating myself even more. Um, you can't find a place that cheap in Provo now. And even then, that was like the cheapest place, and it was really crappy. It was not a great place to live, but it was cheap, and I knew I had kind of done the math, and I'm like, I could work a couple of shifts every month at McDonald's and afford this apartment. So like, I'm just gonna sign up there. And so it did kind of change the way I spent my money. Yeah. I don't know.
So, did you actually work at McDonald's, or was that just an example?
No. No, I just knew like
Never ended
anything,
up.
any job that I could get, I would
Gotcha,
be able to
gotcha.
cover my basic needs. I didn't work there. I ended up taking a job taking care of people who had disabilities right when I got home. And probably a couple of reasons. One, I have always had a soft spot for people with disabilities. I have some, extended family members that have disabilities, and I just loved it being around them. And it also just, you know, pragmatically, it was a job that worked with my schedule and was flexible. And
Right.
the pay wasn't great, but I made enough money I could survive as a student in Provo. And so that's kind of what I started doing right when I got home. Um,
Gotcha.
I did that just for a couple of years until I got a job at a startup. Actually, it's kind of how I got into startups. Is when I got engaged, my cousins were working at a startup in Provo and ended up getting me a job there. So that was kind of interesting. Yeah.
And after you kind of went through that whole experience, I mean, you finished this mission. You said, okay, I'm going to go choose this place to live. It's not going to be the nicest place, guaranteed, but I'll be able to afford it. I'll be able to start putting my money elsewhere and not just going towards the landlord every single month. Why did you why do you think you even had that mindset? Because I know plenty of students who, even if they're the ones working for their apartment, for their housing and whatnot, they actually go out and get these really nice places, and they spend pretty much everything they make that month just on the rent alone. So, what kind of mindset did you have to think, okay, my living condition might be crappy for the next few years, but it's going to allow me to open these doors or these opportunities? What made you think to go that route?
I'm sure living in South America for a couple of years, like you can probably relate. I don't know what the cities that you served in Brazil were like, but I served in places in Peru where, the housing was really, really simple. You know,
Hmm. A lot different
no
from the
heat.
U.S.
Yeah, yeah. Like no heat, no air conditioning, limited access to like even bathrooms and uncomfortable furniture, no access to
Hmm.
like fridges or kitchens in the apartments I was in, just a totally different way of life than I was used to. And so it's funny because I think in contrast to that, living even in like the dumpiest place in Provo, I was like, this is great. I've got a kitchen, I got a twin bed, I've got a bathroom I only share with two people. It didn't seem that bad. I'm sure now if I were to go try and live there, just because I'm spoiled and I'm, you know, like live a comfortable life now, I would go and be like, oh, this is kind of rough. But at the time, it didn't even really seem like that big a deal. I don't know
Yeah.
what your experience was like when you got home, but I guess you were kind of like some in the States and some in Brazil. I wonder what your contrast was like, comparing those. But
No, yeah. I mean, for me and for the audience who doesn't know this, so part of my missionary experience, I served in Curitiba, Brazil. So I lived in Brazil for a year, and then COVID hit, and the Brazilian government kind of said, "Okay, no more." So we got shipped back to the United States, which allowed me to finish doing missionary work in Houston, Texas. And yeah, I think, like you're saying, stark contrast. I mean, living in Brazil compared to the United States, there's a million different aspects: the food, the culture, the people, the language, everything is different. Um, but I think you're right. It's something, it definitely humbled me. And I feel like you're right on top of that aspect. When you're in Peru, I'm sure it humbled you with some of the circumstances you saw people living in. And granted, even as missionaries, sometimes we would be living in an apartment or in a house that was often better than what some of the people who actually lived in that city had. So, very humbling experience to say the least on that.
yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, but those are probably things that contributed. But yeah, I had a really great experience, and really, I think as you watch people who were spending a lot of money on, the car they drove or the apartment they lived in, probably an outsized amount of their income on those things, you just realize that it doesn't actually make people happy most of the time. Most
Right.
of it's pretty fleeting, and you can see it in people's eyes. Like pretty soon, the apartment you lived in for a year that you're overpaying for is like not that great after being there for a year. And there's a nicer one that opens up down the street. And then students are like, it's not, oh, that's not the cool place to live anymore. Now all the cool kids are moving to this place that's more.
Exactly.
And, you see people get caught up in that. And I think we all can get caught up in it in our own way. But once you spot it, um, you know, you start to realize like, oh, maybe I won't try and play that game.
hmm And I think that's a perfect segue into a quote you actually mentioned when I first met you, and I wrote it down here. It's by Marcus Aurelius, and I'll let you jump into it a little bit more fully. You're the one who brought it up and whatnot, but for the audience, the quote goes, "Settle on the type of person you want to be." And once again, that's by Marcus Aurelius. Settle on the type of person you want to be. So, what does that quote mean to you inside of your life, and how did you connect that experience of um, finishing your mission, going into this different atmosphere of schooling and whatnot? How can all those things relate? And I guess even into your life right now, where, like you said, you're living a lot more comfortably, obviously super successful financially, as well as with your family and your spiritual goals. Like, you're living a good life right now. How does that all connect?
Yeah. I do like that quote, and it's kind of interesting because when I was a college student, I had periods of time where I was trying to figure out who I was, my career, and dating people and trying to figure out who I want to spend my life with, and you know, my faith and my hobbies. There's all these different aspects of our lives that we're trying to figure out. Especially, I think that period of time, your 20s, are like this really formative, period of time. At least they were for me. And
Super
that quote,
formative, yeah.
yeah, right. Like the full quote says, "Settle on the type of person you want to be and stick to it, whether alone or in company." And I read that years ago, and I think about that all the time. I think some of the people I've come to admire the most are the ones who have principles that they stick to, that guide their lives, and they're not like easily influenced by people around them.
hmm
Especially for the negative, right? So I think it's okay to have a positive influence on people and lift people up and encourage them and inspire them. But I think about this quote all the time, and whenever you spot somebody who seems to be able to like make good decisions and be a person of character even when they're surrounded by others doing different things, it's fascinating to me. And I've found myself studying people who seem that they can do that. I actually read an interview a few years ago in Rolling Stone magazine, um, where they interviewed Cascade, like the EDM musician. He's like,
Yeah.
the top one of the top, EDM music guys on the planet. He fills, like soccer stadiums all over the world with his fans, like dancing and being
hmm
crazy. Um, but he is like, has the same faith tradition as us. He's a member of my same church, and um, he's like a family man. He's got 4 kids and a wife, and he's just a really principled guy. And this interviewer in Rolling Stone asked him, like, okay, how does this work? You're like this family guy, you got all sorts of kids and a wife, but yet you're like filling these soccer stadiums with these, rave music and people going crazy and doing who knows what. Like, how do you
It
balance
almost
that?
seems like two different worlds, huh?
Right?
Yeah.
But then his response to the interviewer's question was like, I decided a long time ago who I am and what I'm all about. And I read that and I was like, that's the most amazing thing. I really admire that. And when I think about in my own life, examples from people like that have made me want to commit and decide, who am I going to be? What are the things that matter? And then once you commit to it, there are a lot of different things that can come at me, or things I can experience, or other people can experience things or choose things that I wouldn't. But I think that is being able to commit to the things that matter to you and the type of person you want to be first can help you, um, make decisions that are difficult long before you ever actually are forced to make them. So,
So if I can kind of jump in there for a second as well, that's the principle is basically in layman's terms, stick to your values, figure out what your values are, and stick to them no matter if there's a million people around you, your friends around you, your family around you, or just by yourself. You basically set these core values and actually live them. Don't kind of
yeah,
falter. Don't. I've actually done a podcast on this in the past where I go into the topic of how you do one thing is how you do everything. And I feel like those two topics correlate with each other. How you do one thing is your values. How you do one thing is your perspective. How you do one thing is how you're going to set your framework for literally anything you do in life. And
yeah,
when I'm hearing you talk about this quote, and honestly, the first time I ever heard this quote specifically was from you, it really struck me that those two principles coincide with each other. That no matter what situation you're placed in, whether you're 13 and all your friends start getting into drugs and you hold that principle of no, I'm not going to do drugs, or whether you're 45 and you're surrounded by all these bigwig CEOs from whatever company you're working for at the time, and all of them are into, whatever it is, and you hold to those principles is what I guess the point I'm trying to get to. But from your perspective, Scott, what are some ways people can figure out which principles actually matter to them? Because it's like there's the moral principles that I feel like everyone knows in life. Don't kill, don't cheat, don't steal. These are things that everyone should
yeah,
kind of live by. But when we get into the nitty gritty of a person's singular life, how do they kind of figure out what their morals are, what their perspectives are, and how they actually want to live and be the type of person that they set out for themselves?
yeah. That's really interesting, and I do think there are, some really basic kind of universal principles that people, objectively think are important. You listed off a few of the really obvious ones. I think it is harder to decide, what beyond that. That's kind of like the baseline. Don't murder people, don't steal things, like don't lie.
Mm-hmm.
But, those are like really basic. I think once you get to a point where you're able to incorporate those sort of things into your life, I think, and maybe some of this just comes with age or experience, but I feel like you start to spot people who you admire, or you find yourself in situations where you have to act or make a choice. And I think it's an iterative approach where you develop those principles, and you have an experience that's really difficult for you, and you navigate it, and as you're reflecting on how it went, you might see a principle that comes out of it. I think a lot of it comes from, just like reading and studying and getting to know other people and finding
Okay.
people who you look up to. Like you have, like, I read this article about Cascade, and I'm like blown away. His experience really resonates with me, and I find myself admiring that, and I think like that is a principle. Like, I want to incorporate that into my life. I need to be someone where, like, I know the sort of person I am, and I stick to it no matter who I'm around.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of it comes from people that we across, and that we come in contact with, who inspire us, or things we read.
Yeah.
But yeah.
If I could jump in, sorry, once again.
No, go ahead.
I really like your thought there too, where these sorts of things are always changing. Because I feel like a lot of us, we get into this mindset when one night we're really excited, or one day we're really excited to jump on top of our goals, our aspirations, our dreams inside of our lives. We get super excited about all of that, but then the issue is we're only excited for that certain period of time. And then, the next couple days, the next week, the next few weeks, months, years, we start kind of degrading what we already set. We set that goal to go to the gym every single day, and then, you miss a day, and then you miss a day. And it becomes a habit of actually not doing what you originally wanted to do. And so, as you're saying that, as you continually meet new people, as you read new things, as you learn new things, you're applying these principles and you're kind of adjusting them to your life. You're learning them and applying them as you go. That's a beautiful strategy because I feel like it'll help people not just make a million things they have to do right then, but they can space them out and recognize, okay, for the next year, I'm going to work on solely this. And then after that, I'll be at this stage, and then I can start working on something a little bit different. Do you have any
Yeah.
examples inside of your own life, Scott, on how you've kind of applied that principle?
Yeah. Um, I agree with you. Most of us have the best of intentions, and it's so funny. It's almost a trope now that like beginning of the year we all set these resolutions and then
Yep.
they die off really quickly. And
Yep.
my experience has been that if I want to actually develop a habit or I want to make a change in my life with regard to something, like I have to engineer specific habits into my schedule every day, because left unattended, I probably won't just remember to like work out. I need to use, I've got like this, sticky notes all over my desk and a digital version of my calendar and alarms in my phone and a wife who's super supportive. And if I have something I'm trying to accomplish in my life, like communicating and setting up reminders and that sort of thing really helps me to be diligent. Like one thing I do, kind of getting back to your question about, an example, um, I like it's really important to me to take time each day to express gratitude. Like I've realized over the last 10 years of my life that one of the things that leads to me having a good day is having feelings of gratitude for the things that I have going on in my life.
Right.
And so I've just built into my schedule every single day, like every morning, I have time to reflect and to be grateful. And I literally have a piece of paper and I write out all the things that I'm grateful for. And that's something that works for me. And I have to have it on my calendar and I have to do it every day, because if I don't, there will be most of the mornings, things will be busy enough or crazy enough or something else that's also important will, take that space and I won't do it. So I think time management kind of goes hand in hand with reinforcing some of these habits that we're trying to develop, or attitudes we're trying to cultivate.
Okay. And for a busy guy like you, I mean, you have a ton of stuff going on inside of your life. And now you've recently started working with BYU Sandbox program on top of all the business and on top of the family. Um, I guess just as a side question here is kind of deviating from our main topic. How, what are your strategies for time management? You got a lot going on. What do you suggest for people? Is it more of like prioritizing what's more important? Is it like setting out blocks of time in your day? How do you do it all?
Yeah. Um, so my experience has been that we are pretty good at making time for the things that we care about. And it's something that's like mediocre. We're good at fitting in when it's convenient, but then other things that aren't real exciting, even if they do matter, we are really quick to just push out, and usually in the name of, how busy we are.
Hmm.
And for me, I've had periods of time, I would say I've never been less busy than I am right now, actually. Like I'm busy. I have a lot of things going on, but I've had in particular like a 5-year stretch of my life that was really crazy. And I think getting really disciplined about what you spend your time on and making sure that every hour of the day matters,
Right.
um, is really helpful, right? Because you'll hear people say things like, "Oh, I just don't have time to work out. I can't go to the gym," right? And in my head now, when I hear that, I think, I wonder how much time you spend on Instagram every day,
Yeah.
because like I bet you do have time to go to the gym if you really want to, but Instagram is easy and going to the gym is hard. And I think each of us does that, right? I had stretches of my life where I was doing that, where I was allocating my time to things that don't really matter because they were easier. I had this good friend who in college was just like always so busy. Like every single time I saw him, like, oh, I'm just so busy. I'm like, oh, it's just crazy. I'm so busy. But then, I'd ask him about like the Jazz or the NBA. He's big into basketball, and he had seen like every NBA game for any team that he cared about. He had watched like their last 5 games,
Yep.
right? And I'm always like, how do you do that if you're so busy? You watch like 15 hours of basketball this week,
That's
And I like think,
incorporated in, right?
right? And we're super good at making time for the things that like matter to us. So I think kind of circling back to your initial question, like how do you make time for it all? Being deliberate about what you schedule in each day and what things get your time is really important. And I've just realized, like when I was first in college, I kind of liked video games, and I liked, I'm trying to think what other, like I like social media is hilarious, like memes and all this stuff. Like I could go TikTok, I could go blow through 2 hours just like scrolling through TikTok,
Yeah.
watching nonsense, like funny things, and laugh my head off. But I've just realized that when life gets busy, like those things are, expendable, but like having meaningful time each day with my kids is not, and exercise is not, and there's all these things that take priority. And so when I'm reflecting on my day, I've had to try and be really deliberate. Some weeks I'm good at it, some weeks I am not good at it, and I need to regroup. So one more thing I'll say on that, uh, you've got a college aged audience who is like, among a lot of other things, trying to figure out who they want to spend their life with. One of the things that helps you be really effective with your time is marrying somebody who values the same things that you do. Because I will say, one thing that makes it really easy is my wife and I are pretty aligned on the things that should
Right.
take our time each day. And so, I mean, we argue about stuff here and there, but we do not argue about like our schedule and who's doing what, because our priorities of like, okay, first is, our family and work and, our commitments to the community or our church, these things that are like non-negotiables for us
Top
as a
tier on
couple.
the list of like must
Yeah.
get done sort of action.
Yeah. And like those things get first priority. And then, hey, we got a couple of
Hmm.
nights free this week. Do you want to, X, do you want to go on a date? Do you want to go do these things that, go hang out with our friends or whatever the other things that can fill in. Watch a basketball game, which we love to do. Um, I would say one of the other things that'll have a huge impact on how you spend your time and how effective you can be with your time is like the person you marry and how they do that. Because I know other people who, it doesn't matter what my priorities are. In order to avoid conflict in my marriage, like I'm going to spend a whole ton of time doing the things that my spouse cares about, which for a lot of people like don't really matter to them, and it can create
Right.
conflict. Or anyway, that's a big deal.
No, I think that's a really good point, and that could be applied to not just who you marry, but who you're dating at the time. And on a different aspect, obviously not for much of the romantic relationship of it, but for your friends too.
Yeah,
Are
totally.
you living with people who are going to uplift you and challenge you to become better, challenge you to do hard things, challenge you to, like you said, get off TikTok or Instagram and go to the gym? Or are you living with the type of people who, oh, it's okay to slack off, it's okay to not go to your classes, it's okay to not go to work, it's okay to not try on anything, and not even just your roommates but your friends in general? Are you surrounding yourself with these types of people who are going to uplift you? I think
Yeah,
that's a very strong principle, so I appreciate that, Scott.
yeah,
And Scott, as we're getting close here, we're at our 26-minute mark here. As we're kind of getting close to the end of the episode, I wanted to bring up one last thing that, as I first met you, that you mentioned, and I have another note right here. You told everyone, and guys, for the audience who doesn't know, Scott actually came into one of my classes at BYU and gave a lecture to us about some of his businesses and life principles that have made him and his version of success. It made him who he is. And so this is one other thing I jotted down that I really appreciated. He said, treat everyone like a brother or sister. And before I ask you this question specifically, Scott, on what you mean by that and whatnot, I want to reference this back to actually a podcast I was listening to yesterday. And basically, the whole premise of this guy's episode was treating your family with the respect and love they deserve. And he was basically saying how you get to a point where, say, you're the youngest child, all your siblings have grown up, they've gone off to college, gone off to work, moved away, started their own families. And he said, I wish I would have known that I basically had 18 years with my brothers and sisters at home, and I let go of all the stupid arguments we had. I let go of all the dumb conversations we had, and I wish I just focused more on loving them and having positive experiences with them. Because he's like, now I look back and me and my siblings, luckily, we have a decent relationship, but we don't see each other near as often as we did, and it's just not how it was when we were growing up. So I really liked what he said in that podcast because it made me think about my own life. I am the youngest child, and so I'm thinking, wow, like, yeah, I don't see my siblings like I used to, and I'm thinking about those stupid little fights me and my brother or me and my sisters used to have. And now jumping into that, I wanted to get your perspective on why you think it's important to treat people like your brothers and sisters and what that means to you.
I just feel like, uh, a lot of the frustrating things that you can experience in life come from conflict with others. And one of the ways to diffuse it is just treat others with respect and kindness and empathy, like no exceptions. And, if you develop the habit, and if you can, obviously I'm not perfect at this. You could, interview my wife or my kids and they'd be like, he's like mostly good, but all of us have
Hopefully.
like our moments where we're not at our best. But I feel like in general, if we are constantly trying to treat others with empathy and kindness and understand their perspective, you just make better choices. You develop these meaningful relationships, and a lot of people have different things that matter or make their life meaningful. But to me, like one of the most beautiful parts of mortality, like, is just the beautiful relationships I have with people, like my family, my friends, my neighbors, my community. And those like relationships aren't just things like, I don't just like buy you something one time as a gift and then we're lifelong friends, no matter what happens. Like those type of relationships are developed over the course of a really long period of time, like these really lightweight interactions, but compounded over a really long period of time, build, those relationships that are like, that's what life is all about to me.
Right.
And so, if you're treating people that way, like people treat you that way, and that is a recipe for, having a really great life, in my opinion. Periods of time in my life where I was like in conflict with others, especially if it's, because of something I'm doing, are markedly less satisfying for me than times where I like, getting along with people and feeling peace and interacting positively with people. So that's really important to me.
Yeah. And I like how you put that as one of your top priorities. I feel like that's a topic we've kind of drawn back to in almost every single question this episode is kind of prioritizing and scheduling out what actually is meaningful inside of your life. There's always that principle of good, better, and best. There's always good things you can be doing. There's better things than that. And then there's the best things. And treating people with love and respect. I mean, I don't think you could get much better than that. Whether you're religious or not, that's a principle that I think every human should live by. One of those values that they should never sacrifice, no matter whoever's around. Going back to what we were originally talking about. So thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
And Scott, as we're closing up here, this is something I always ask my guests on the Get Over Yourself podcast as we close out the episode. And it's this question here. If you had one piece of advice, say the entire world was listening and they could hear you at this very moment, if you had one piece of advice, what would you tell them and why?
One piece of advice for the entire planet would be, I think we are increasingly pulled to the fringes, and the media, and oftentimes our friends or our family members even get caught up in telling us that we should hate each other and that we're so different, and there's this us versus them mentality that is just rampant in social media and the news and in our communities. But we are not that different than even the people who we think we should hate. And I think I said this when we were chatting in class, but people are really hard to hate up close. That's a Brene Brown. It's like a quote of hers that I really like. And just understanding people and spending time with people and, interacting one to one and refusing to buy into all of the rhetoric and the hate, makes people feel loved and helps create that sense of community wherever you are, whether it's, in your family or in your home or in your apartment with your roommates, wherever you're at. So
Hmm.
don't buy into the hype that we're supposed to hate each other, and look for ways to build bridges and build that sense of community wherever you are. I think that would probably be about as impactful as anything I could imagine.
That's perfect. Thank you for closing us out on that note there, Scott. If we all just treat people with a little bit more respect, and like you said, if we can imagine being up close and personal, maybe not hiding behind the screen all the time or yelling at them through your car windshield or whatever it may be, I think the world could get a little bit friendlier. So I appreciate that, and I know the audience does as well. So,
Sweet.
guys, we just heard from Scott. Scott, thank you so much for jumping on with us here on another episode of the Get Over Yourself podcast. It's people like you who make this show so fun to do because we're always getting a wide range of diversity and experience on the podcast. So, thank you for dropping on with us. It was awesome.
Yep. Hey, thanks for having me.
Guys, if you want any more info about anything that Scott has done, that's going to be linked in the description below, as well as some other details. Also, if you enjoyed today's episode, if you think it can maybe impact somebody's life or benefit them in any way, feel free to share it with them. Also, if you wouldn't mind, the way I continually grow the podcast is by getting positive feedback and reviews. So you can either leave me a positive review on the streaming platform that you listen to, or you can send me a message at my email, llcgetoveryourself@gmail.com. I'm open for feedback and any ways that I can improve the podcast to benefit you guys. So thank you once again, Scott. Thank you, audience, for listening. And at the end of the day, just remember, it'll all be okay. Just take a step back and continue treating people like your brothers and sisters and show them the love and respect they deserve.